There was times when my dad was sitting right next to me with a shotgun, and we're waiting for people to come to the house. Our house became gang central. My dad had a 12 gauge, and he says, "Keep your on him. If we move, shoot him." And I was like maybe 11. He didn't know the code of the street. He began learning the code, and I paid the consequences for that. Hey folks, my name is Rene Enriquez, and you're watching Uncensored. So this is where the book, The Black Hand, was birthed. We talk about a lot of stuff here, and I haven't seen these videos in a long time.
Come out shooting. It was just, my dad's a square man, hardworking Joe. My mom's a square lady. Kind of permissive in terms of, lenient in terms of her disciplinary standards. I mean, we could get away with anything with my mom. My dad was a disciplinarian, but my mom, we go ask Dad, "Hey Dad, can we do this?" "No." Then we go to Mom. "Mom, Dad said it's okay if it's okay with you." "Oh yeah, go ahead." And then we're gone to do it. And then when my dad confronts us, say, "Mom told us we could do it." You know, so it's a normal, the kid running the game thing, but he only knew how to deal with us on our level. He could not exert the authoritarian, disciplinarian rule that his father had over him, and we wouldn't accept it. We were just a different generation of kid. He was raised in Mexico, and he didn't understand all of these things. He's from a different generation of individuals. I mean, he was raised in deep Mexico, Jalisco.
I look back in that in retrospect, and I feel so sad. My dad didn't know how to relate, and that we were so rebellious. It got to the point where I didn't care about the beatings or the whippings, and I would still go do it. Because as a kid, I was afraid of my dad. I was afraid of my dad, and I respected his authority. It was always yes, sir, no, sir. That's how he wanted us to address him. And it got to a point where I just like, nah, I'm going to do my own thing. And I'm sorry I put my parents through that. I look back at it, and you look in retrospect that, you know, your parents want the best for you. And I know I want the best for my kids, and I want the best for my grandchildren. And it would break me if they had done the things that I did. You look back at it and think, what was my father thinking when I was putting him through that? What was my mother thinking when I was putting them through that? It's sad. It's truly sad when you look at it. But I'm glad they got to see me change. For the new viewer, there's a variety of ways to support the channel. Most importantly, watch the videos in their entirety. Hit that hype button, like, leave a comment, subscribe if you're not subscribed already.
Where a father's word is law, you know, and it just, there's no circumventing that authority. There's just no way that's going to happen.
Well, what happens here that gets circumvented then?
We just come from a different generation.
Yeah.
There was a communication gap. There was different exposure to cultural priorities, I guess. I mean, we're exposed to the drug culture, permissive sex, gang violence, and we have different priorities, I guess. My dad had different priorities than us. I mean, he was a square guy, and we're kids that are experiencing this freedom and this rebelliousness, and then my dad comes and tries to exert this authoritarian rule over us, and we're not going to have it. I mean, well, all right, in front of him, okay, Dad, we don't want any problems with my dad. You know, he's a very authoritative figure. And, but behind his back, we're taking off. We're going to getting high, and even though we know we're going to get in trouble, we're going to get a whooping if we come home loaded, we're still getting high. You know, we're not so scared of Dad anymore because we're becoming young men. And we can stand up to him now, you know. We can fend off his blows, you know, we can block them, you know.
Are you carrying guns all the time now?
We're carrying guns on a frequent basis, yeah.
I remember when we lost the fear of Dad, and he just resigned to the fact that we were going to do our thing. And I think he was more of a mind like, I'd rather have them home and doing whatever they're doing than being on the streets. That's the unfortunate reality, that he stopped trying. He stopped trying because we weren't going to listen, and that was our fault. You know, I don't put the blame on my parents for failing me. The choices I made were mine alone. And a lot of people do that. Well, my parents didn't raise me right. My parents didn't give me the love and affection. My parents this, I made my choices. And I accept full responsibility for everything I've done. And I pay the consequences for that. Unfortunately, I didn't listen to my father. And I come to learn later that everything he said was true. I just didn't want to listen.
On your body or just
on our bodies, on our persons, yeah. As a matter of fact, my mom caught me with one time, and she tried to take it away from me. I said, no. You know, I told her, no, Ma, I need this. I need this gun. And my dad knew at that point in time that we needed protection against the gangs because they're shooting at us. So I guess he realized that this is a more dangerous world than he's accustomed to, that he has to make certain concessions because we are involved in gang violence. And I think that more than anything, he wanted to keep us close to home rather than have us in the streets. And that's one of the reasons that they allowed us to be in the garage and hanging out with the homeboys, because he didn't want us out there. You know, at that point in time, he could take care of us at home. That we at least have some form of safety there. He didn't want us on the streets, and he knew it was a dangerous world for us because they had shot at the house. We hadn't been involved in violence, and Mark had got stabbed, I had got stabbed. There were just certain things that happened that they made him realize that you know, it's not the world in which he was raised. They made him realize that you know, it's not the world in which he was raised.
My dad was like a square guy. He wasn't a gang member or a criminal. He's a Korean War vet, and he just knew hard work. I remember him working all the time. In fact, he had his own business. He had started resin craft decorating industries. And that's all he knew, dedicating 7 days a week going to work. Very rarely did he take a day off. He'd go on there at 6 in the morning, come back at 6 at night. And that's all he knew. He didn't know gangs. He didn't know the code of the street. He didn't know the violence that we're involved in. He started seeing it when they started shooting at the house and when my pops got involved in some of the ruckuses that we had at the house. And he began learning. He began learning the code. And I'd look at him and I'd see him like befuddled, like what's going on here? But he got down with the business when it was time. There was times when my dad was sitting right next to me with a shotgun and we're waiting for people to come to the house. Another occasion where we got into a beef in the front yard, my brother was fighting some guys, and my dad and I heard the ruckus and we went outside. I had a 410 shotgun and my dad had a 12 gauge. And my brother was beating the bark off of this guy in front of our house. But this jealous guy, who my brother took the girl from, came over to my house screaming, and they threw a potted plant through my window. And my brother Mark ran outside. And the guy, he had a Thunderbird, like a show car. And Mark started beating the hood and the fenders up with a garage door spring. You know those big springs from the garage door? He started going to town on this guy's car. Then he dropped that spring and started beating up the guy who came to start problems at my house. Me and my dad hear this and we run outside. My dad throws me a shotgun and he grabs a shotgun. And just as these three guys, they're converging on Mark. Mark's fighting with the one of them, has him up against the fender of the car, beating him up. My dad and I come out and have him at gunpoint and we back him up. And Dad was gung-ho. He cocked the hammer back. I cocked the hammer back. And he says, keep your gun on him. If he moves, shoot him. I said, okay. And I was like maybe 11 and we're out front and Mark mops this guy in the front yard. And then Mark tells him, get the F out of here. Don't ever come to my house again. And we go inside, me, Mark, and my dad. And that was that. This is a regular occurrence at our house. We had drama there all the time, right? I mean, from somebody who was raised in Mexico, who's a military guy, square Joe, not a criminal, doesn't do drugs, to have sons involved in that, in some form or fashion, drug use, somebody ODing, somebody. And my dad just rode with it. He accepted us unconditionally. And he never said, get out of my house, none of that stuff.
We're living in a different time. So, although they understood that we might have access to guns and they might have seen us with guns, I believe at some point in time they realized that it was necessary for our protection to be armed at that point in time because, like I said, people had made attempts on us and they had shot at our house and to them it was like an alien world, to my mother and father. You know, I talked to my dad later on in years in life. He says, I thought it was so crazy to have guns and things and have to be armed at times in our own home. We lived in a nice area and people were shooting at our house and we had to have guns and I didn't understand that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think to this day my dad fully understands the depth of violence in the gang life. Mm-hmm. Something he never became accustomed to because he was never exposed to it, nor my mom. Mm-hmm. I think they just maybe turned a blind eye to some things, understanding that it was for our protection. So,
what was your neighborhood like?
Really nice. Really nice. Business owners.
Track house?
Track houses. Yeah. Track houses. Really nice area.
Let me correct that. The inside of the garage door was like a tagging wall. Everybody would write on the inside of the garage door. All my homeboys and people that came over, they would write on the side of the garage door. And my dad blew it at first when he saw it. He said, what is this crap? And he had my brother cover it up. But it just kept happening. And my dad just let it go. I mean, the gangs are all around it, Artesia, Norwalk, Hawaiian Gardens, but Cerritos didn't have any gangs. We were the gangs there. We were the gang there. Our house became gang central because every stoner, every gang member from any hood, even remotely in the area, came to our house to party or score drugs because we began ultimately selling drugs from there.
4-bedroom home, front yard, backyard, garage.
Not graffiti all over.
No, it was a really nice house. Really nice house. Just, I'm telling you, it was a really nice area. And when we lived in Thousand Oaks, it was even a nicer area. 2-story house with a balcony, built-in deck in the back.
When did you move there? How old were you?
Oh, I was about 9. Right after that, we lived there for a few years. Then we moved to Cerritos, about 10, something like that.
When you were about 10?
Yeah, maybe I was a little younger in Thousand Oaks, maybe 8.
Yeah.
And at about 9 or 10, we moved to Cerritos. We lived at Thousand Oaks for a couple of years. And it was a really nice house. I mean, you know where Sunset Hills is at?
Yeah,
that
basically.
nice
yeah,
golf
yeah.
course and country
Yeah.
club. We live right there. Really nice area. Next to Conejo Valley.
Well, when did it all start really going south for you then? Well, when did it all start really going south for you then? And when did you really become a full-fledged gangster?
Oh, right before I married my wife, my first wife. Then I was already into it. I wasn't even using heroin at that point. I guess that's when it really started going bad, when I started using heroin.
And when was that?
Oh, at about 16, I started chipping.
Can you remember the first time you were exposed to it?
I remember the first time I had bought some, just to buy it. I had bought some just to buy it. I mean, we had just did a robbery, and we had went and bought some cannabinol. I think it was some powder that tetrahydrocannabinol. You snort it.
I remember this occasion distinctly. It was me and my friend Hector Perciado. He lived in the track right next to mine. We did a couple of robberies together, him and I. And I remember the first time we bought a spoon of heroin and we split it. We didn't even use it. The next day, I told my brother what I had and he gave me my first shot. He cooked it up and showed me how to do it.
Gives you this kind of weird high. It's kind of like a marijuana high, but enhanced. Somebody was selling heroin at that point. And me and some other guy went halves on a spoon, and I bought it, and we split it. I stuck it in my pocket. I forgot about it. The next day I got home, I remembered I had it, and I told my brother Mark about it. I told my brother Mark, and I remember that I found some of his outfits that the homeboys had brought over, because Mark wasn't a full-fledged drug user at that point either. But I remember that I'd seen some paraphernalia, syringes and stuff that I found in my room that the older homeboys were bringing over that I guess they were using there. And I told Mark, I said, hey, I got this, let's do it. So he cooked it up for me, and I got a shot, and he got a shot, and that was the first time I had used. And I remember getting sick, like horribly sick the first time.
Throwing up.
Yeah, throwing up, vomiting, and violently ill.
Everybody says that.
Really, I was violently ill, but after you get over that throwing up and that, there's just a euphoric warmth. I mean, you sit back and you're just in this drug cloud, this euphoria that is just so attractive and so alluring.
That is the problem with opiates. It's that warmth, the blanket that envelopes you. It just covers you, and like there's no more cares in the world. Like there's no problems, nothing. You just feel good. And I think that's the thing is I fell in love with that feeling at an early age. It was like 16 years old. I had that first shot. And I wasn't a daily user after that. I was what they call chipping is you shoot here and there. But at some point I did start using on a regular basis. And I was hooked. I didn't even know I was hooked. But I remember that first occasion becoming violently ill. I was like, wow, I don't like this. But after that, you got over the nausea, that warmth. That was like everything. Chasing that for the rest of my life.
Something brought me back to it. I didn't go back the next day to shoot dope. I didn't go back the day after, a week after. But at some point, that was deep-seated in my memory that this is a good euphoric feeling. And I became an addict for most of my adult life after that. Serious heroin addict. And like I said, until a few years ago, I was finally able to break the grip of heroin and dope, and I didn't smoke cigarettes anymore. I had a fine cigar, though. As a matter of fact, I got some on my property. I'm going to have me a few when I get back up to the Bay.
Believe it or not, I was being transported to Long Beach Airport, and I was with the FBI, and I mentioned I wanted to smoke a cigar. One of the agents brought a cigar, and we'll pull into the parking lot, and we have about a half hour to kill. I fire up the cigar, and I'm smoking the cigar. And it was the first time I really had a cigar. I was uncomfortable with it. I didn't know how to smoke cigars at that time. It's completely opposite to what I lived, right? And I never thought I'd have the opportunity to do these things, and I do now. And it's just so rewarding, the little things. And I never want to lose that feeling like, oh my God, this is so awesome. This is the first time I did this. Because every day is a first for me. It really is. I'm never going to lose that feeling. I'm never going to neglect that and realize the blessing that I've been giving and being a free man again. Because I'm the guy that was supposed to die in prison. I was never supposed to get out.
Can't smoke here, but that's the only vice I have. That and my coffee. That's it. And I'm pretty darn proud of that one accomplishment. If that's the only thing I do in my life, I know I'm okay with myself. I'm not using dope anymore.
Yeah.
I feel better for it, too.
Yeah, ex-heroin addicts are few and far between.
Really. Believe it. Because there's always the regression.
Well, they all say only about 3% make it,
Well, I'm going to make it. I've done it this far. I mean, obviously, I could get dope now if I wanted it. I could be loaded right now if I wanted to be. But I don't want to be. Your whole life you spend wasting chasing the dragon. So much money I've wasted in dope. So many opportunities. Even though I was successful in my crew and all that, I was always loaded. Always loaded. There was times in Pelican Bay where I overdosed. Laid out in the cells. Sally's had to revive me. Laid out in the cells. Sally's had to revive me. I had people die at me in Pelican Bay due to the heroin use. Muskie from Maravilla, Manuel Castaneda. My cellie died. Heroin overdose. We had so much heroin over there.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. Musk from Maravilla. He was a pig when it came to dope. And nobody really liked him. He had this long hair, right? Long hair. And his hair would get everywhere when I was a cellie. It would be on my bed. It would be everywhere. There was no avoiding it because there were no combs there in Pelican Bay. So he used a palm brush to comb out his hair. And then he'd do this drying thing that he did by fluffing it around, and his hair would fly everywhere. But we all ended up in single cells there. CDC had a policy where they separated everybody, and very few Mexican Mafia members were cellies. After the ABs had eliminated, I think it was 6 people in 2 years. There were a lot of strangulations and going on over there. They had a little technique. It's called the Green Beret garrote technique that they would utilize, and they were effective at it. They were just taking out their own. So we're all end up in single cells, and Musk ends up in a cell down from us on the lower tier. I remember this distinctly, that Daryl, Baca, myself, and Musk are waiting for visits. On visiting days, the gun tower officer would allow us to take showers. And I go out to shower, and I see Musk laying on the floor. And with the needle dropped by him, he's out. He's out. He's in a respiratory arrest. You could hear that deep breathing like that, right? So I run back upstairs, and I tell Daryl, I says, hey, brother's OD down there. And I says, should I call man down? He says, let's get our showers first. I remember that. He wanted the shower over saving this guy's life. And I wanted my shower too. I'm not going to lie. So I take my shower. I take about 15 minutes in the shower. I come out. Daryl comes out, takes a shower. And then he stops by the cell. I said, what are we going to do? I said, let's say he has a seizure. Let's call man down. After about a half hour passes, right? So we have one of the camaradas in the pod call man down. And we say, hey, he's got a seizure. I think he's having a seizure. They take another 10 or 15 minutes to get an extraction crew together because they're not going to open up the door to save him. And they go in and extract. About a half hour later, Augie Lopez, he was what they called then as a program administrator. It's something akin to like an associate warden. Augie Lopez was in the hood. And he'd always stop by and talk to us. He comes by my cell. And by that time, me and Daryl are high again. We didn't get visits that day. Musk had a visit waiting for him. It was his niece. And she came to visit him, and they went out in the visiting room and told her that he's deceased. It was a terrible thing, right, for his visitor. But Augie Lopez comes to my cell and says, hey, Rene, get rid of the heroin. He says, it's bad. Musk just died. And we didn't get rid of it. We used it all. It was just that Musk would use so much of it, because we had a lot of it, that he didn't know when to stop, and it cost him his life.
It was just ridiculous.
Yeah,
We'd sit back with big old chunks of balls of heroin, ounces of heroin at a time. You know, cocaine, pills, anything we wanted, we had in Pelican Bay.
That drives people crazy on the outside. Like, how do you get drugs in prison? You know?
It's so easy. It's so easy. The cops turn a blind eye. They don't want to create waves. And we have so many methods of smuggling in dope that if one gets cracked, we find another way. We had cycled, so when one stash of heroin ran out, we had another one coming in. And then I was so lost in Pelican Bay in dope that there would be weeks at a time that I'd be loaded. Just gone. I remember the cops come looking at me and just going, he's loaded. And some cops come in and tell me, are you all right, Rene? So, yeah, just leave me alone. I remember times that I woke up on the floor after having overdosed with the syringe in my arm. On the floor after having overdosed with the syringe in my arm. On the floor of my cell in Pelican Bay. That's how much heroin we had. That's how far gone the dope I was.
The cops knew. Every time we got a package, we were getting clavo. We were getting half ounce of dope every chance we got. And we're doing it in the trick cereal. We'd have them put it in multicolored balloons and throw it inside the trick cereal, and it was like an optical illusion. You couldn't even see the heroin. We'd have to pour it out on the floor on newspapers and search through and get each little balloon out. And the cops would know. They would know immediately. To them, it was like we weren't bothering them, and they didn't care as long as we didn't die on their watch. In fact, I had a cop come by. He just looked at me, and I was sitting on the toilet dripping sweat, and I was cowed. I mean, I was loaded. He just looked at me and says, don't die on my watch. It just kept going. That was old school COs. They were guards. There was none of this body camera stuff, and that's how we existed. And they knew, just let us do our thing. Even when it came to drinking, we'd crack open 5 gallons at a time, and they wouldn't come raid us. Like, there are some cops there that were dicks. They do cell searches every day. They would go raiding for wine. They would actively crack you for contraband and give you write-ups. But our housing officers didn't bother us. I mean, we had mafia members in there, like a whole pod full of mobsters. And they knew, like, these guys, man, this is all they got. They're not really bothering anybody. So I think they just turned a blind eye to it. As long as we weren't killing anybody, and as long as we didn't create paperwork for them. That's really what it is. They wanted to come, run their housing unit the way it was supposed to be ran, where they just had to feed in the morning, pick up trays, and that's it. That's all they wanted to do. And kick it at their desk sleeping for the rest of the day. Essentially just left us in peace. And we left them in peace. We never created drama for them.
And at some point I realized that if I continued this, it's all I ever was going to be. I was ever going to be is just a sleazy dope fiend. And I wanted to be more than that. I wanted to be more for my kids and for myself. Primarily for myself. But I wanted to be able to tell my kids that I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm just a regular guy now. And my wife is pretty proud of it too. She had a lot to do with it. She hated it. She doesn't use drugs, never used drugs. Nothing. She didn't even smoke cigarettes.
And you avoided hepatitis? And
No, I got hepatitis C, but I went to the...
I'm sad to say that I started using again about a year or so after that in Lancaster. I had a norteño, Sally Smiley from Sacramento, I think he was from. And he told me, hey, let's sell this. And he asked me, he says, can I do a shot? I said, yeah, do a shot, go ahead. And he says, you want some? I said, yeah, well, why not? And I did it after a few years being clean. And I went into the dope fiend status again. Because I was a pig too. I had no limitations. I would shoot dope until it was all gone. And that was a pretty sorry point in my life in SMY in Lancaster. I was just shooting dope every day, bringing it in. I started dealing dope there. But that's another story for another time, folks. With that said, let me encourage each of you to hit that thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Hit the hype button and leave a comment. Peace out.